This is part 2 of connecting Mongo, GraphQL, and React together to create like a starter project code. And if this is a long video, so feel free to check out the source code and you can just run npm install and npm start on the API and the UI folder and you'll have everything working just out of the box after you create your Mongo connection string. But yeah, so this is an option. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the video. And then also please subscribe to the channel and click on this link to support our channel. So let's go ahead and log in to MongoDB. And I'm gonna log in real quick. Okay, I'm logged into the Mongo cloud.mongodb dashboard and I'm gonna create a new project. So new project. And then I'm going to call it Mongo-GraphQL-React-Starter. Next. And then create project. And then build a database. I'm going to use free. And then, I don't know, Google Cloud. Okay, never mind, AWS. Oregon, and then cluster 0 is fine. So create, and that'll be free. And then I'll see you in a minute or 2 or 3. Okay, so now we're ready to connect to our cluster. So if we hit the connect button, we aren't able to connect yet because we have to set up permissions or firewall access. So I'm just going to do allow access from anywhere. You can put your specific IP address if you want. And then we need a database user for this specific database or cluster. So I'm going to say John, well, lowercase John. I don't think it matters. I'm not sure. And I'm just going to do the super secure password of capital P password 1 exclamation point. Create database user, and then choose a connection method. Oops, why did it? Oh, allow access from anywhere. You actually have to click that add IP address button. And so now we actually have a user and an IP address that is allowed to connect to this. And so this user is for this project. And so now we can choose a connection method and we can use that specific user we just created. So connect to your application, and then we can use this string and we can go back to our Mongo or our API server. So down here, we will basically just say mongoose.connect. But I think there is some up here at the top. We can do const mongoose equals require mongoose. And then down here, underneath apply middleware, we can do our connection string. So we're going to say await mongoose.connect. And then we will supply our connection string. And so we have our database user and then our password here, which is going to be password 1. And then here is our cluster information. And then we can create our own database. So I don't want the database to be named my first database. I would rather it be named Mongo GraphQL starter. And don't get that confused with the project name. This was basically going to have a project with a database named this inside of it. And I guess we should probably call it, well, I'll leave it like that, Mongo GraphQL starter. And then the rest of the string. And then use new URL parser, true. We'll save that. I actually don't know what that does, and I'm too lazy to look that up. So I'll just take it for granted. And then I think that is it. I think we should be connected at this point. Before we do anything else, let's do a sanity check and just make sure that everything is still working. So if we go to our studio.apollo GraphQL sandbox explorer, we can run this query and it looks like it still works. So I think we're good. So now let's go back to our text editor and let's update our resolvers and type defs. So I think we'll start with the type defs. And what I'd like to do is create a record in Mongo just to make sure that it works. And so to create a record, you're going to need a mutation. So we're going to need to make a mutation and resolver in the mutation. So we're going to do type mutation. And then what I want to do is I want to create a post. So I'm going to run a create post, and anything in a mutation is going to mutate a piece of data. So in this case, we're going to have a function called create post, and that's going to do some mutating of some kind of data. And so I'm going to not leave any parameters just yet. We're just going to say it's going to mutate a type of post, and then we're going to create the post directly in the resolver for now. So we're creating a type of post, so we need a type of post also. So type post, and this is going to be the shape of the post object. So we're going to say ID is a type of ID, author is a type of string, and then content is a type of string as well. So this is the shape of data that GraphQL is going to return. It's going to return a post object, which is guaranteed to have an ID, an author, and a content, and guaranteed because of the explanation points. So we have a type of post, and then we have a mutation resolver, create post. So now we need to create this resolver in our resolvers file. So we have a queries object, but we need a mutations object. So, well, technically you don't need one, but you need mutations available. And so you may as well store them separately in a mutations object. So I'm going to say const mutation equals, and then we have a create post, which is defined here in the type defs. So we need to make a create post function. So create post, and then GraphQL supplies 4 parameters: parent, args, context, and info. We're not going to deal with any of those right away, but we are going to create a post object. And so because we're using Mongo, we want to have a Mongo record being created. So this is the function where we're going to write our Mongo code. So typically, hopefully you're familiar with Mongo at this point, but typically it would look like something like this. So if we're creating a post, we would do const post equals new, and then a new post object. And so we need what's defined. We've already defined what we need. So here in this post, we need an ID, author, and content. So the ID is handled for us by Mongo, so we don't need to worry about that. We just need to do author and content. So let's say author is going to be equal to John, and then content will be equal to hello, I am a post. So we have that stored here in this post object, and with Mongo you would do something like post.save. And so, but we need to return a post that looks like this, or that has these 3 pieces or properties in the object. We need to return this shape from the create post. And we know that we have to return that because this is the type that this function is going to return. This is the return value here. So that's what it's got to look like. So we have something that looks like that here in this post, and so we may as well just return what we save. So return post.save. The only problem now is that we don't have a Mongo model that defines what this post object is here. So we need to define that, and we're going to do that up here. Well, we're going to import it. Const post equals require models post. And so this is where we define the model from Mongo. And so this is what the post object is going to look like in Mongo. So we have this /models/post. So we need to create that, and that relative to the resolvers file is going to look like a new folder called models in src, and then post.js in the models. So this post.js file can have, well, in Mongo itself, you can actually have more things, but this is just kind of what is expected in this API. So I'm going to say const mongoose equals require mongoose. And then we're going to say the post model is going to look like what we're about to define. So const post equals mongoose.model post, and it's going to have an author of type string and a content of type string as well. So module.exports equals post. Okay, so now we're exporting this model here. So we've exported it from here, and then we're importing it in our resolvers here. And so then because we're connected to Mongo, we can just run post.save, and it will save this object. So now we need to put this mutation inside of this resolvers here, so it's actually accessible. So we've got resolvers of query and mutation, and then we're exporting it here. And so this mutation object and all of its functions, they're being exported from this file and then imported into index. And then that create post is inside of this resolvers object because we're importing it from over here. So this mutation that we created is available in the Apollo server. So now in our resolver, when we call this function, it's going to save our object. So let's give it a try. And we have it defined here in the type defs, so it should be available in our Apollo Studio. So let's give it a try. Over here, you can refresh, even though I think it automatically refreshes for us. Let's see. So root. If we click here, root, and we get our mutations, we can see that we do have a create post resolver. So we can call this create post resolver here. So I'm going to say create post, and then we have to define what data we want back. So I'll go ahead and get the author, and then if you hit control space, it should give you the other options. So I'll get author, content, and ID. And so now, and again, we're just running create post because we don't have any parameters yet. So let's hit run mutation, and awesome, we get this back. Hello, or contents, hello, I am post, author is John, and then here's the ID. So now let's go into our Mongo database and see if it's actually visible. So we can hit browse collections, and here we go. Here's our posts, and we get author John, content, hello, I am a post. So awesome, we are connected to Mongo through GraphQL. So the next thing that we'll do is we want to be able to add parameters. So here in our type defs, we can say we want to be able to pass in arguments. So author is a string, and then content is also of type string. So we can save that. And then in our resolvers, we can now have access to these arguments. So resolvers, and now we can use these args instead of just hard-coded data. So args.author, and content is args.content. So now if we save, we should be able to pass in arguments and create our own posts with custom data. So author is, oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, it's making me, okay, whatever. I don't want those. Author will be Susie, and then the content, it wants content as well. So content is going to be of type string, which I'll say Susie likes food. Okay, so now if I hit run, it's going to create this one, Susie and Susie likes food. So if I go over here, refresh, we get Susie and Susie likes food. So we have our posts that are being created. So we're good on that. And then the next thing we need to do is just, let's make one more query real quick. So we want a query for our posts, and that's pretty simple. We just do posts, and then it's a function that basically just finds all the posts. And this is just Mongo code at this point. So we can do like const posts equals post.find. And then I'm going to save a little bit of time. I already know that this needs to be asynchronous, so we're just going to do await and then async. You can try it without it to play around if you want, but post.find, and then we got to return the posts. And then that's our posts query, but this isn't going to work because we have a resolver defined, but it's not defined in the schema. So we have to tell GraphQL what queries are available to run on this GraphQL server. So we have to define that posts query as well. So posts, and then we have to say, what it's going to return. What is this posts query going to return? It's going to return an array of objects that are post objects. So it's going to return an array of things that are shaped like this post object here. And then that's pretty much it. Let's save that. I think that should work. So let's go back to our sandbox, and then let's try to query for all of our posts. So query posts, ID, content, author. I hit run, and we get hello, I am a post, and Susie likes food. So we have queries and mutations in GraphQL. And Mongo is connected. So I think we're good to go. The next thing we need to do is React real quick. Before we do that, though, I wanted to talk about the old playground. And so when I first started using this, they didn't have the headers, and there were some issues with cookies. They may have gotten this fixed by now, but at the time they didn't. So I want to show you how to get back to the old playground if you need to do that for whatever reason, or if you just prefer it. So here in our code, it's basically a plugin. So we have this array of plugins here. Well, we need one more, and it is called Apollo Server Plugin Landing Page GraphQL Playground. It's a very long name, but oh well. So now we need to import this into our plugins array. So I'm just going to say comma, and then Apollo Server Plugin Landing Page GraphQL Playground. Make sure that is capitalized correctly, and I'm sure there is, and also you want to add the parentheses after it. So that I think should work. So let's save it. And then now we should be able to go to localhost 4000/playground. So localhost 4000/GraphQL. Then we get this the old style version that you may prefer. So that is up to you. And if you did that, then you wouldn't need the origin here, this origin here, because we're not using studio.apollographql.com anymore. But anyway, that's just optional. So I'm going to leave it like that for the rest of the tutorial. And okay, so React. So we're already done with the Mongo section. Let's head over into our UI. So basically, our UI, we have the first thing we need to do is go to our index file. And the reason we go there is because we have to wrap the app with the Apollo provider. And so, oh yeah, we're actually going to need to install some stuff. And I forget, actually, no, it's pretty much just GraphQL and Apollo client, I think. So let's, in this GraphQL starter, let's cd into our UI, because that's been installed by now for sure. We're going to npm install in our client the @apollo/client and GraphQL. I think that's all we need. Okay, so that has been installed, and now we can go ahead and start up the code. So npm start in our UI, and our GraphQL server is still running. So it's going to pull up any moment. There we go. I'm just going to drag this over here off screen. Okay, so let's see. We are in our UI. We have Apollo client and GraphQL. So let's close out of that. Let's close out of this and the resolvers and the post and the type defs, so we can just focus on the UI for now. So in our index, we need to import the Apollo provider, which is the context that allows us to kind of use GraphQL throughout the entire app. So we're going to import those. So import, and it's called Apollo client and Apollo provider. And then we're also going to need in-memory cache and create HTTP link. And these all come from Apollo client. So now we need to create the link. And the way that I think of HTTP link is just like a link between the front end and the server. So that's kind of how I think about it. Anyway, const HTTP link equals create HTTP link. And then we have the URI. And so I'm going to say URI is equal to, and then it's going to be a URL with a /GraphQL at the end. And basically this is the URL to the server. And so if it's hosted somewhere, it's going to be that domain. But because we're just on localhost right now, it's going to be http://localhost:4000/GraphQL. And this is basically, again, just directing the front end to the location of the server. And so our server is running on localhost 4000, and then the endpoint is GraphQL. So this is where we need to fetch our data from. So hopefully that makes sense. And then now that we have our HTTP link, we also want to set the credentials to be include. So credentials include. And this allows us to have the headers and like cookies and all of that kind of stuff that gets sent from the server to the front end, so we can tell if the user is logged in, you know, depending on how you set up your authentication. But I want credentials to be include. So once we have that set up, then we need to create the client. So we'll do const client equals new Apollo client. And then we're going to say the link is HTTP link, which is what we just created here. And then our cache, our browser cache, is going to be this new in-memory, cache object. And I do have a video on in-memory cache, so I'll try to remember to link to that, so check it out. And that is really cool cache stuff for Apollo. So after that, then we can just wrap our entire app in Apollo provider. So Apollo provider, and this is just context. So client equals client. And then Apollo provider, we're going to wrap the whole thing in app. We're going to wrap app in the Apollo provider context. So we have access to queries and mutations and everything that Apollo, this GraphQL server that we just made, is made. So app has access to the GraphQL server that we just made. Sorry. Okay, so that's done. Now let's go back to our app.js file, or go to it for the first time, and we can create our query to test out GraphQL. So what we need here is to import use query and GQL from, from Apollo client. And use query is the, querying the server, and then GQL helps us create our string, or our query format. So here we'll say const, and we're going to query for all the posts. So we're just going to say const, and we're going to call it posts query equal to GQL, and then here's where we create our query string. So query, and then we're going to get all of our posts. And you'll notice this looks exactly like how it looked in our playground. So, well, let me just make it first. So ID, content, and author is what we want to retrieve with our query. And then, okay, so now let's go look at it. So if in our Explorer, notice how it looks pretty much identical. So yeah, keep that in mind. Anyway, now we can actually run this query with our use query, with this use query here. So we say const, and then basically we can destructure to get only the information that we need, and you can check out the GraphQL docs for this, but the use query returns a data object and a loading state, so we can pull those out from the result of running use query, and then we have to tell GraphQL which query that we're running. And so we're running this query here, which is stored in posts query. So posts query, there we go. And then now it's just as simple as saying if the query is still loading, then return loading. Otherwise, we can console.log our data. So let's save that. And now let's try to run that and see what we get in our React. So I'm going to refresh, right click and inspect. And here in our console, we're going to get data is undefined. It says access to fetch at localhost 4000 GraphQL from origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by cores. And that's because in our server, src index file, this cores options, the server is only allowing requests from studio.apollographiql.com. But this request from our front end is coming from localhost 3000. So we need to allow the server to take requests from localhost 3000. So inside of our origin array, we're going to do comma and then HTTP localhost 3000. So we'll save that. And now let's retry. So refresh the app. And now we get data and we get an array of posts. So that is pretty much everything, I think. Let's try one more thing, and that is I want to make sure that this app works, or this works when our server is not using the playground. So index, and then what we did here, we'll comment this out and save. And now let's try to run. So this, because we commented that plugin out, this playground isn't going to work anymore. It's going to be back at this area here. So if we try to query for our server, we can still run the query, and then let's see if our front end works still. So refresh, and we still get it. Okay, so I think we're all good either way. So, and I kind of like, I'm still used to this old playground, so maybe I'll keep it there. But anyway, that is a full setup Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when we release new tutorials. Also be sure to like the video and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Lastly, check out the link or links in the description. We usually create a blog post to go with the tutorial, and we might have a newsletter or course or something to check out as well. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.